let's get started. It's good to see you all for our February meeting of the Safe Neighborhoods Commission. Um, okay, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So one of the big things that Dr. Fleming and his staff have been working on is a survey. He and I had kind of gone through an earlier draft of it, and he just sent me the one that I shared with all of you. So it should be in your emails. If you did not get it, let me know. But I'm going to turn over to Dr. Fleming to talk about kind of the process and how we'll be able to utilize the information.
Okay, well, thank you. So the survey link that has been sent to you, can folks see it or? Yeah, so, it's always a challenge of how to find the right balance of the items to include versus it being too long. So had the opportunity to share a previous version with Jonathan, and from that we kind of reduced it. So the items that are in this survey are items that are utilized in other national types of surveys to try to get at the degree of exposure to violence, either personally experienced it or having witnessed it or having heard about it and in the community firsthand. The version that we have here is just a yes or no type of response options. The original types of surveys that are used will often ask, how many times has this occurred for you, and there's subsequent follow-up questions that can be asked. So really try to kind of scale this down, kind of a yes or no type of experience, and then we can, with this type of survey, create an index of the degree of exposure that the average respondent had to that. So there's some demographic questions in the beginning. We can look to see if there's anything missing or anything that we want to add as well. And then there's the items that are here, and then again scaled it down to just ask, is there any particular asset in the community that we think we should have aware of, and then kind of an open-ended question. This question here also that is currently up there, is there other types of violence that people have been experiencing, and how often? So this is kind of a draft. We can create a print version of this as well to share. If we are wanting to gather information from individuals under the age of 18, then I think we would want to look at some modifications to this. So, that's kind of the 30-second blurb on it. Open to thoughts on items that are missing, things to add.
So Dr. Fleming, I know, and Mrs. Ortman and I have talked about this. I think it would, and we've all talked about this, that would be a good thing for us to be able to send out to our students. Waterloo is really great about being one-to-one. What would need to change for those surveys before we could take it live?
To take it to the students, or?
Yes.
I think, well, on one hand, we're not asking for any identifying information. One of the issues is, if a student discloses that they've been sexually assaulted or mugged, and we have any identifying information, that opens up a whole another process. I think making sure that it's and implementing it in the school system, making sure that it's clear that it's voluntary, being able to provide a script for why this is being collected, or that the teachers or the person is clear in how it's described. If we ask students these questions, are there other questions that we would want to, or other items or areas that we'd want to tap into?
I know that we had discussed at one point being able to utilize this broad survey, excuse me, to pull in folks potentially for a focus group or for a sit down, to hear them expand, because it's one thing to type it into a computer, it's another thing to hear a person's lived experience. So is there a way to do that with this survey, or would that be us going back, collecting the data, and then finding a new way to approach
yeah,
those folks?
We could, at the very end of this survey, place an item that if they are interested in participating in a focus group or providing more, we could insert a link that they could go to give us their information.
Okay.
That would be outside the survey.
That's the key, right? Is to make sure they understand it's not attached to the survey. So the
Right.
survey remains anonymous, but they then can volunteer to be part of the focus group.
Okay.
If we're going to do a survey like this in schools as well without identifiers, I do think we do need to think about, and this is when it becomes, I know, a sticky wicket, but think about also being able to provide some, a quick one page or something, support material, with like Riverview Center. So if we're asking a teenager if they've been sexually assaulted, and whether or not they say yes, we're still asking them to consider something, make sure there's a one pager for them to just give them in return to say, these are resources to follow up should you need someone to talk to, or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Gwen. And I think being able to provide that information to whoever receives it.
Yes, everyone. Yes. Agreed.
If this is an issue that's of concern to you, here are some, resources.
Therese, we can't hear you. I think you were talking and we.
I wasn't talking. I was just agreeing.
Oh.
I was going to say it, but you jumped in and started, so we're good.
Sharice, were you wanting to say something? I heard you look like you were, and I was looking to you to see what you were going to say, and then Teresa spoke. So I'm not hearing you, Sharice.
While she's trying to figure it out, I'll just make a quick comment. I just quickly reviewed the survey, Michael. The last section where it says, how many times have you? And then the follow-up question under, that's kind of an open-ended question, says, tell us more about that time. And I just don't know how the two attach. That kind of references the question above, but the question above doesn't sort of make sense. So that was just a quick thing that I saw.
Okay. Yep. I will, there's a link, a logic formula that's not there. So if they clicked never,
Oh,
they will move on down.
gotcha,
If they
gotcha,
click
gotcha.
1 or above, then they will.
That makes total sense. Okay, makes sense. So does it kind of get it down to the most intense experience or recent experience, or do you know?
For this particular question?
Yeah, for the one that if there's a logic sort of for the number of times and then it goes to the.
Well, to be honest with you, the questions that were above were in more of this kind of format, and it really kind of made it long.
Gotcha.
So
Yep.
I reduced that, but then I kind of debated whether this particular question that asks, are there other types of things, whether leave it like this or move it up into the matrix type of question. So
Can you hear me now, Dr. Fleming?
Yay.
Oh, good. Well, anyway, I'm learning, right? I had to allow for some access since I'm accessing from home. I don't usually have those little snafus when I'm in my district office accessing, right? So IT and me, I guess I'm figuring it out. So I would want to make sure I'll look back at those survey questions a little closer with our student services department, just to make sure, like, think about what group. Some of the things that you've already talked about, I would be a little concerned if it was something that, you know, could cause pause for the kids, and making sure families are fully aware of the content of the survey. I think that part we have to be transparent about anymore. So I'm not quite sure. Let me just think about this a little bit. I'm thinking health class. They already do some different kinds of things along the lines of safety. So I'm just wondering about, especially the one, if they were assaulted, is there a sexual assault? If they were sexually assaulted question, that one might be a little bit provocative. We might need to think about how we would reword that. That's my only concern. And again, to your point, what does that then lead to? If there's no next step of how to help a student, even though this is an anonymous survey, then I feel a responsibility that if we have collected data as a mandatory reporter and a student clicks on that, I'm feeling that there needs to be something else. So that's my only concern with some of the questions that are being asked. I'd really have to look at those more closely with student services and get some feedback on them of what we can and what we would not be able to ask.
Right. We can.
I hope we can figure that out, because that's such an important question, and
it is.
That's what we deal with all the time. So many students that need help that don't want it reported right away because they know that the world is going to fall apart. So it would be nice to be able to have the answer to that question.
And then to your point, what would we link that to so that then there's kind of another step there, right? It's not just, now I've actually gone through a survey, although it's anonymous, and this is a crisis state for me. Now, is somebody going to be there to say, here's the next support step, whether it's Success Street or it's one of the many organizations in our community? But what would be the follow-up to your point of what I kind of was listening to as I was fixing the audio? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly the point, is since we're part of Success Street. So yes, that's exactly the point, that what would be the information we would give them so that they know that there is a place to go.
Right.
So it's not, like you said, it's not just asking a question and then feeling like people are walking, they want the information, but no one's there to help. So, yeah.
Right.
And we could, for their response to any of these questions, we can do a link to, here's this, you have indicated, yes, here is a resource for you in your school or in your community, as well as at the end providing resources as well.
Mm-hmm. That's why I think health class, I don't know about you, Jonathan, but that just feels like there's already some supports and conversations of these topics that are more personal or provocative, and that there would be a next step and not just that it's sitting out there and there's nothing else.
Right, a little bit different than if I just gave it to the kids in seminar, which is a little bit of a different feel.
It is.
Feel, and
Yeah, and space for sure.
Yep.
So Sharice, do you and Dr. Fleming want to just connect after you talk with
Yes.
Ed Services, and then
Yep.
we can obviously do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Now for the rest of it, I think we can look at the link's really easy, so we can put it up on social media once everyone feels comfortable with it. I think some printed having folks have the ability to print it as well, and send it somewhere or collect it somehow would be important too for those physical pieces. We don't want those to disappear. I know that Michelle had talked about taking it to folks at the jail, or if we were able to place them in churches or in community centers like People's Clinic. We might want to look at on the printing, even just having, I don't know, we want to make it as easy as possible for folks, right? So even having like, send it here to City Hall and they can send it to me, and then I can sort through that stuff and send it to Dr. Fleming or something, because we want to make it as accessible as possible. We don't want that drop off.
So a couple questions or thoughts. One is that we can, and I think I mentioned doing this, and apologies for not doing it at this point. We could create a flyer with a QR code on it and post those places.
Yes.
So that people could just, use that as access. The print version can create a PDF of this and make that available. It look a little different, but that's possible. One of the one of the things that we kind of limit in doing this kind of a scattered approach is we won't know. There's no reference point. So 80% of the respondents said blah blah blah, but we don't know the pool of respondents out there type situation. So that's kind of a downside, but it does give us some feedback. Two questions I wanted to bring to the group. One is I picked the time frame of 3 years based on some other surveys that are used out there. Does that time frame seem to be a good one? Do you want it shorter, longer? Thoughts on that. And then the other question I had is I put it in here with knowing that I was going to bring it to the group, is I asked about experiences in Waterloo, because that's obviously what we're wanting. But is that thoughts on that? Do we want, because people experiencing trauma from Elle's Place coming into Waterloo to work, maybe one thing, but we are tasked with violence within the Waterloo communities. So those are two questions. Just want to get feedback on.
To me, the 3-year time frame makes sense. That gives us, I mean, through COVID, even to the year before COVID, so that gives us some data without being too long. So 3 years makes sense to me based on what we have seen with like police reports and sort of the up and down of that data. I personally would keep it to Waterloo just because that's kind of what we're tasked with. I know that there are lots of challenges facing lots of folks, and I definitely get that. But I think for this one, since we're narrowly focused on violence, particularly gun violence in Waterloo, I think for me, we probably want to keep it within that framework.
And then the other question, throw out there for consideration among everybody is, I indicated lived or worked in Waterloo, figuring that those experiences, people kind of opening it up. And I just want to check with folks on that.
I think that's a good distinction, just in that when you think of how many people come in from, smaller communities outside who work in Waterloo, but still then they work here, they eat here, they shop there, all the things that they do around their work and go back home. I think their perspective is a good one as well to have, so that people aren't parsing out, oh, I don't live in Waterloo. It doesn't, I don't count. I think adding that gives them permission, as members of the Waterloo community, because they work here, to participate.
Okay. Others thoughts on time frame or?
So just a question, what was the data behind the 3 years? That made you think? The data, you said there was data behind the 3 years, like why 3 years versus 5 years kind of question.
When I referenced data, what I was meaning is that when this scale has been used in other places or versions of it, they've captured a time frame. So it's not a lifetime experience, but it's, the idea is capture more recent types of experiences. So some may use 3 years, some may use 5 years. So that's just kind of a thinking, okay, what would be a good time frame to capture?
The reason I'm asking is just wondering and looking at like Waterloo's crime. And in the last 3 years, it hasn't been as violent as it was 5 or 6 years ago, where these kids that we're now dealing with issues, that's what they're struggling with, is that violence that happened 5 to 7 years ago. And that's why 3 years, I get it, but our crime has been lower. It's those things that happened 5, 6 years ago that are impacting students or these young people now.
So you would argue for a longer period to capture?
Yeah, like at least 5 years.
5 years. So 5 years ago would be, my math, 2018. Okay. Yeah. We definitely can change that.
And was that, and I apologize, I probably missed something. I apologize for coming in late and then missing our last meeting. Are you talking about going back in the question and saying, in the last 5 years, have you experienced? Is that what we're talking about when it comes to, okay. Yeah. I figured that's what it was. I was just double checking. Instead of having a question, in your life, have you ever, you're asking within a span of time.
Right. Yeah.
And then what are we hoping to do with the data after it's collected? What's our action step as a committee? What are we going to do once we see the results of that? And I'm thinking right now, if the group is going to be kids in health class at the high schools, that would be a specific group. It would be, good news is it's all of our kids have to take health class at some point, right, to graduate. Most of the kids who take health in Waterloo are 10th graders. So we would really be getting most of the data from 10th graders in the Waterloo schools across East, West, and Expo. So, and again, of those who would volunteer. So we could find out, I can get the numbers of how many kids are in health classes. And then from there, we could definitely find out how many took the survey. And so we would know our sample size. But my wonder is that sort of the age group that we were thinking? So when Teresa says the trauma that happened like 5 years ago, if that's one of the questions in the last 5 years, what age group would that put those kids at? Is that the range that we're thinking? Or when the trauma occurred?
Well, I think originally we were looking at capturing a variety of folks with the survey, one large group being students, but also community members.
Okay. And
So I
then
think
about what are we going to do with the results once we get the survey results back? What's our action steps as a commission?
right. So one, I think having that data, and I think even having it from like sort of a broadband of like, this is what 10th graders who volunteered told us, but we're also going to reach out to the community. I think part of it is just being able to look at the 10,000 foot view of the data that we collect, and seeing what that tells us. And then I think that's where that important piece of, would you be willing to talk to someone or be a part of a focus group, so that then we can, and I'm not saying the whole commission has to be there, that might put some people off, but a couple of us might do a rotation of focus groups, so that then we can hear from folks, dive a little bit deeper, ask questions, because the survey doesn't get into it. And I think it makes perfect sense of like, what are the factors that led up to that? What is missing from the picture to help folks not make that choice? That's a hard survey question, and knowing our students and them getting a survey that want to get it done as quick as possible, some of them. So I think that's where that connecting piece of, if you feel comfortable, we would like to talk to you about that. We want to hear more about that, and we want to get into the bigger things, so that when we start looking at the policies that interim director Emmerich shared with us, the other things that the police department's working on, or other things, then we can make arguments and in our final report, hey, we surveyed students, here's the broad data, here's specifically what they said was missing, whether it's they need more activities, or they feel economically isolated, or something that helps us hone what our message will be to the full council later on this year, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So a couple thoughts on your question. Also is that this would be one data point. Your conditions for learning data that schools provide is another data point. Some of the findings that may come out of the school or in general, it goes into the report that we're tasked with creating. It also can be data to help look at funding sources down the road too, so that if you have among the students that are participating, X% of them report that they are being threatened with physical harm, that's another data point that could be used to, indicate the need when you're looking, for funding sources as well. The other thing that I would say is, with this survey, we can have skip questions, so that if there is a student that is responding to that, we could also skip down to other types of questions that we may want to ask in terms of what they believe needs to happen in their school or in their community, that could provide some open-ended data to grapple with as well. Again, keep it simple.
I think too, when you think about kind of what to do with this, what's next step, it's also looking at, is it validated, or does it validate other research that's out there from a national perspective? So I'm thinking about, the research, and of course this is because what I eat, breathe, and sleep, but the new study that just came out that talked about the incredibly high rates of sexual violence that teenage girls are experiencing, the sexual harassment they're experiencing in schools, and how that impacts their mental health and their tendencies towards suicidal ideation and whatnot. Like, I think depending on what these survey results, they really, they can be validating for what we've seen on a national level, which then, as you said, Michael, can also then give more credence to funding sources and options and treatment and all those kinds of things.
Yeah. So, Jonathan, someplace I have the agenda, and this, here we go. So one of the other things that have unfolded, is it okay to go ahead and talk about the ISU project?
Yeah, I was gonna transition us to that as we talk about more face-to-face type stuff. So I think just to wrap up the survey, why don't you work on polishing it for like the community aspect, work on with streets on polishing it for the schools aspect, and then we can. I don't really want to wait all the way till the end of March to talk about it again as a full group. So maybe we have an email conversation about that, so that we can get that out to the schools in lots of places. I know we have spring break, but perhaps shortly thereafter, and get it out to other folks as well, if that makes sense on the survey piece.
Is your spring break March 13th that week?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So, but yes, please talk about the ISU opportunity.
John, can we go back to the survey for 1 second? I have a question on one of the questions. One of the questions has, have you witnessed somebody carrying a gun, holding a gun, or a knife? I think we want to be a little more specific. I mean, every cop you see is carrying a gun.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, we just want to get a little more specific with that one. So everybody's going to say yes to that. It's going to be misleading.
Yeah.
Maybe in a threatening manner, something along those lines.
Yeah. And one of the questions I had, Joe, on that, as I was putting that one in, do you think there's merit in separating out knife from gun?
Yeah, I do actually. Quite honestly, we see a fair amount of, we see more gun violence than we do edged weapon violence on the street. However, I think edged weapon violence is probably just as prevalent. We just don't get as many calls on it. So I think there is a value in separating it out, because I think a lot of the knife stuff goes unknown.
Okay. And if we separate that out, would knife capture everything, or is there other types of weapons that we'd want to reference, or is knife pretty much?
I think knife's enough. I mean, it gets you any edged weapon. Yeah, baseball bats, and there's a ton of other things, pool cues, a lot of things you could use, but I don't think you want to get that far into it. I think knife would be plenty good. Edged weapons and firearms pretty much covered, I think.
Okay.
I think in a threatening manner or something in that regard.
Yeah. Okay. Make that change. So go ahead, Jonathan. So earlier in the year, several meetings ago, I referenced talking with some colleagues down at ISU about a project that they have been working on, looking at the link between vicinity of alcohol facilities, bars, establishments, and different types of violence. And they've worked with a couple other communities kind of mapping that out. And that was in part a conversation looking at a grant opportunity. For a variety of reasons, we didn't pursue that. Well, a couple of weeks ago, Sean from ISU reached out to me and said, hey, we have another funding source that allows us to work with some communities to help them understand community level indicators of violence, being able to kind of do focus groups, bringing together a group of community stakeholders to have a conversation about what does their data currently tell them, what data could be collected, kind of like a strategic planning, kind of like what we've been doing here, but being able to kind of pull in from their perspective some of the current data that's out there. Joe, the calls for services, what do we know by census, poverty, all those macro level stuff, as well as kind of doing some work with the task force and stakeholders on, okay, what other data is missing? Here are some possibilities to think about. like your alcohol establishments, like other hot spot areas, so they shared that they have this and they would love to be able to kind of work with Waterloo, given the work that we have already been doing. And it seemed like a wonderful opportunity to have some outside folks come in and help facilitate a conversation with some of us and some other stakeholders that we might want to bring to the table, look at, adding on to the conversations that we've had, helping to kind of look at some other things that can be looked at in terms of correlates of violence within the community. So they have the funding to do it. What it would look like is setting up about an hour to 90-minute meeting to kind of walk through things. Ideally, it would be a face-to-face meeting, but they would be willing to, do a Zoom meeting, just kind of different, doing a Zoom meeting like to kind of do brainstorming, strategic planning and thinking, and they could do it this spring. So to me, it seems like a great resource that we could, take advantage of.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think so.
They have the funding source. I mean, I would think making it accessible to folks, so probably like, if possible, after like 9 to 5 work hours, I think would be important. But the more hands to help on this, I think the better. And that to me it's a no-brainer layup on getting the resources to help us do our job.
The other thing that it would, a couple of things it offer. One, as I shared, a way of kind of adding to and facilitating what we're doing. But the other thing that I would offer is not comparison in terms of how we do against other cities, but how other cities and their experiences, what are some of the things that they are looking at that we may want to look at or that doesn't apply to us. So we are kind of in the midst of, in the trenches, but being able to bring in some outside folks, say, hey, over here, they were using this type of data to help inform their grant writing, their policies, et cetera. So I think that'd be an advantage as well.
Yeah, as a lifelong learner, professional development to help us look outside what our day-to-day look like, I think is really helpful. Because I know, and I've talked to my colleagues in other cities, I know Davenport's looking at something like this. I know Sioux City, Dubuque, Council Bluffs are also, we are not the only community dealing with this. But being able to see what's worked for them, what doesn't work, how that might apply to our context, I think is going to be really key, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to figure out what wheel fits for our situation.
Yeah. So I think the part of the challenge is to find a time to get everybody there.
Yeah.
So with spring break and everything, just kind of throw out, does April seem like a good time frame? First part of April?
I think that makes sense. I think if you want to reach out to them and see what might work for their schedule in April, and then see what works for them. If not everyone can make it, I understand we're all very busy, but if the most of us can, that would be great. So yeah, I think early April probably makes the most sense for the most folks so that we can hit the ground running and get what we need to then move forward.
And I think, of course, as soon as we can get it on the calendar, the better.
Yeah.
So then we can schedule around it.
Yeah. And talking with Sean, some other folks that they have had on their committees in these cities that I don't think we currently have is somebody from like emergency departments or first responders and, you know, the EMTs, ERs, Chamber of Commerce, you know, the business sector. I think those are a couple of people that particular roles that I haven't heard of us having on our task force at this point, but some other, and then, you know, people from our neighborhoods, communities.
Yeah.
I know those are entities we talked about reaching out to make sure they would help us disperse the survey, but they're not necessarily represented in this group here. Yeah.
Right. So I did just meet with Grove Cedar Valley Friday. And so they're very interested in helping. They're interested, they have a jobs board, so they're interested in helping in whatever way. So if we want to invite them to a meeting or some things, we can definitely put it on their calendar, and they can certainly do that. I don't know anyone that works in like the ER or the first responder field here in Waterloo. So if someone else does, they might be able to reach out and give us some perspective and invite them to the meeting as well.
I can, Jonathan, I can do that.
Perfect.
And I can also, since I am one of the neighborhood associations, reach out and see with our neighborhoods.
Okay. Was there anything else, Dr. Fleming, on that?
I think, you know, what we can do to encourage people to attend, you know, an invitation, or, you know, how can we build this up that this is a special event that you've been invited to,
Sure.
you know, type of thing.
Sure.
So, you know, reach out from the city council or you or the mayor, you know, whatever that additional incentive, so that, oh man, it's such a beautiful night. Oh yeah, I said I was going to go. Oh, yep, you know.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think we all have networks that we can connect with. And I am more than willing to utilize my title if that makes people feel special and write them an invitation. But I know we all know folks as well here, whether it's neighborhood associations or members of the district leadership or the nonprofit field. Or so I think, yes, we want to make sure once we get a date, we put it on blast basically and get it everywhere so that we have folks, because I know folks are hungry to have the conversation too.
Yeah. Wonder if United Way or any of the foundations.
I've been playing email tag with, I'm actually going to see her tomorrow from the Waterloo Foundation, and I can certainly talk to Kay at the Northeast Iowa Community Foundation, see if they would like to be part of this as well. I know they've kind of moved in a certain direction, so I can certainly talk to both of those.
I was just throwing that out as a pondering, you know, whether that would be, or are they down the road?
Do you have, Michael, sort of a descriptor or a paragraph or something about this, you know, kind of a quick summary of what this is, you know, the ISU meeting, what that looks like?
I don't, and I can get one.
Okay. Just something brief to give all these different contexts, sort of an idea of why they should care about this, you know?
Yep. I know where it's at on their website, but I think what I'll do is ask Sean to we'll craft something.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure. Speaking of in-person meetings, I did reach out to the Waterloo City Council. So they would like to have us come to their April meeting on April 19th. That is at 4:30 to 5:30. And talk to them. You know, this is a group that Mayor Hart had started. I was one of the first faculty advisors that worked with young leaders in the community. And they've been doing a lot of work on youth mental health. So they're very interested in having this conversation. So that's at 4:30 on April 19th at the Center for the Arts. They're typically in that room right off to the right when you walk in. So I know there's that. Was anyone else able? I know there was some talk with Eastside Ministerial Alliance or neighborhood associations about having some sit downs. Are we still waiting to hear back from some of those groups as well?
I'm waiting to hear back from 2 of them, and then we should be.
Okay. Perfect.
And I've not had good luck with Chris at Peoples, but we'll keep trying. We keep kind of scheduling, and then it has to be moved. And so,
yeah, no,
I think now that I've kind of seen the survey more, I can give her a little more. I think she was wanting a little more sort of concrete information of sort of what this looks like. So now that I can share a little bit more about it, I think it'll be easier.
And I will say, once we have our ISU meeting, I would like to, because I like talking to people, I would like to even have like town halls like I did last summer, like once a month in May, June, and July. And obviously invite all of you to just have folks come and talk to us also about their shared experience. Less strategic planning, more of a just like, hey, I've lived in this neighborhood, this is what I've seen, hey, this is what I've thought as well. So just so I think once we meet with ISU, I'll want to schedule those out for May, June, and July as well.
I think some of the meetings and data collecting and information gathering and sharing, some of that will come from the ISU meeting too.
Yes.
You know, laying out some plans. You know, another group, is there, in terms of data gathering, I think, you know, some of what we're going to learn is, or gather from this, is confirming some of what we know. But is there any association in the Waterloo community that is restaurants or bars or the alcohol? Is there any collective group of those folks?
I know there was, Michael. I think when you were working on when you were on our board, we did some of the bar education around, you know, sexual violence and whatnot. And I know there were a couple associations that we were working with, kind of the Hill, I think it was the Hill Association we were working with. I think COVID kind of destroyed a lot of that. So I don't know how active they are, but I can certainly have like Rachel reach out to some of her contacts to see if, you know, if any of that is still active.
That's good. Main Street Waterloo would be a good contact for,
I was going to say
at least the downtown bars, and it would grow from there.
Yep.
All right. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. So we want to work on polishing that survey, getting the dates for that ISU meeting. And we have the April 19th meeting with the Waterloo City Council. So I will send out notes. I think Dr. Fleming, just whenever you get those surveys, we can just send that around, and then we can go from there. So is there anything else for the good of the group?
Thank you, Michael, for the survey, by the way. Thank you for working to put that all together.
Yeah, and I apologize for the delay in getting it. It's, you know, it seems like whenever set the time out to do this, is guaranteed that something else would pop up, you know.
For sure.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sharice, is there a good time to connect with you on this survey?
Why don't you go ahead? Let's do that in the next, probably sooner than later. I'll be leaving next Friday for spring break. So let's plan on maybe connecting. Do you have my email? I believe that all of us are on that same thread.
Okay.
If you can go ahead and email me tonight or tomorrow, and let's try to find a time that we can look at that together. And I'll talk with folks in student services about it too, to see if we need to either wordsmith, or then I think, were you the one that was also going to have the next step where we can do the QR codes so that if there is some crisis, kids have some access. So adding some of those links, that would really help with how we present it to student services.
Yeah. Yeah, we can follow up on all of that. So.
Go ahead and email me, Michael, as soon as you can, and let's set something up for before end of next week, okay?
Sounds good.
All right.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for your time and your hard work. We will talk soon.